Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going back to 1840, and we're going to be discussing the case of Thug Behram, perhaps the most prolific serial killer in the history of the planet Earth. This is one that I have to give a very particular introduction to. It was maybe 15, 16 years ago when I was a teenager, and they were promoting a movie called Primeval. And they were mentioning that Jack the Ripper didn't actually have that many victims. What was it, six or something? And they're saying that the Zodiac Killer only murdered five people, which, as you know, anyone familiar with Zodiac lore knows that that's only an alleged number. But they're trying to point out that Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer didn't really murder that many victims, but somebody named Gustav murdered over 300. Once again, this is the movie Primeval. Watching the previews and the trailer, I think we even saw the trailer in the theater or something like that. It must have been a small preview because the movie was actually talking about a crocodile named Gustav, not an actual person, and the movie was an absolute flop. And once I learned that they weren't actually making a serial killer movie, they're just doing like a crocodile adventure film, and they're kind of promoting it in a deceptive way, I didn't want to watch it. But, after seeing that preview, the person who saw it with me asked me, who do you think actually is the most prolific serial killer? And to get his words exactly right, I believe he said, which serial killer do you think had the highest body count? And I was like, I have no idea. So I had to get home and get on the internet. Back in the days of America Online, we didn't have smartphones and search engines at our disposal. Excuse me. So we didn't have, the internet like on our phone or anything. So I had to wait till I got home and got on America Online, and I put in to probably Yahoo at the time, serial killer body counts, and I found about someone called Thug Behram, that he has possibly murdered over 900 people. 931 is the possible number that they're talking about. And instantly, a lot of people are just saying, flat out, even back in those days, they're just like, that is an alleged number. It's most likely that he just witnessed 931 murders. He probably murdered somewhere between 125 to 250 people, going on the stuff that they were relaying back in those days in a very precise manner. But the thing is, though, I really just began to learn a little bit more about what went on. And you learn that thug is, of course, the origin of our English word thug, and it comes to us from the Thuggee cult. And who really was Thug Behram? Well, he was someone who became the leader of the Thuggee cult, but the Thuggees are not named after him. They're something that had been much older, and he joined into an existing movement. The thing is that, though this is a somewhat of a religious order, but they're often referred to as a cult because I'm sure the Hindus and the Muslims in India don't want anything to do with that in part of their history. Not to mention that the Thuggees kind of have their own sort of tenets that are not written down, but just sort of following also the trends of the leaders, because we'll get to that in a second. That's a very important thing that ties to Thug Behram. Thug Behram is somebody who becomes the leader of the cult, right? And he devises his own sort of plans for murder. Why would they want to murder anyone? Well, very simply, this is one of the reasons that drives Thug Behram to do everything. It's to serve the goddess Kali. Kali, the Hindu goddess, the destroyer. And it's like the goddess of destruction, we should really say. And then the reason to do that is because they believe that if they don't commit these murders as sacrifices, the earth will be destroyed. So that's why they have to murder people. Except for the fact that they're also looting the bodies. They're also robbing the people and taking all of their riches. You don't think that there's something there? Once again, I'm very skeptical about it. I mean, I'm very skeptical about a lot of the things that they're talking about with Thug Behram and the details, and you really have to look at that. We're going back to the 1700s and the 1800s, and it's like, it's very possible that a lot of this has been lost to history. We were talking about this with some previous cases about how Like, when you have stuff that's older than even 50 years, it is very difficult to get the precise details because some of it just might not be that well preserved. And the historian Mary Lefkowitz talks about this when she says, "Does the historian ever get it right?" No. Meaning that you try your best, you try to get as close to the truth as possible, but it is nearly impossible to get the exact story down. But the thing is, though, not only do we have them saying that they're doing this in honor of Kali, I don't believe that there's anything associated with that. I believe that the motivation is for greed. That's probably just kind of a masquerade. All right, but that's ideological and spiritual and their own belief system. One of the interesting things that I don't believe is that Thug Behram is he's reported to have committed his first murder when he was 10 years old. I only read that on one little timeline thing, and they said that he committed the murder when he was 10, and then he started stealing, though, at age 18. So it's kind of a bizarre setup, you know. It's like, once again, I don't necessarily believe that detail either. Someone commits murder at age 10 and then they graduate to stealing. I'm skeptical. But I mean, you can definitely see, though, if you can take away anything from that, is he probably started developing some very either bizarre behavior or aggressive behavior from a very early age. I can totally accept that if someone is going to be reported to participating in this many murders, he probably began killing at a very young age and it became very normal for him. But Thug Behram goes on to become the leader of the Thuggee cult, and he devises these sort of tenets that they should follow. Yes, they are murdering people, but the thing is, they are going after individuals that are only male, no women, no children, no musicians, no elephant riders. They have their whole set of tenets that for the people that they must avoid, and they should only kill these certain people. But the thing is, though, the Thuggee cult grows to be rather large, actually. And we mentioned that we're going back to 1840 today. That's the date of the execution of Thug Behram. He was born in 1765. By 1840, he would have been 75 years old. Okay, well then, what's going on with the Thuggee cult? It grows, becomes bigger, more people are incorporated into it, and they start doing things their own way. And they violate the tenets of what Thug Behram has put in place. I should say Thug Behram. I'm still pronouncing it the way I did back when I was 15 or however old I was when I first found out about him. But the thing is, they come up with their own method, and they start ignoring the stuff that he put in place. And he doesn't like that. So finally, when he is apprehended, he is cutting a deal with the British authorities to say that if he turns over, 50 people were turned over to the British authorities because of the confession of Thug Behram, kind of like a plea deal. I mean, they cut a deal. I mean, that's exactly what happened, and that's probably the best way to put it. But he stays in prison for 2 years. That's in 1838 he is apprehended. And the thing about the execution that is quite interesting, there's this YouTube video out about the case called, it's from Kalinka TV, I believe Kalinka. And they said, though, that in 1840, his associates, like his cohorts, are executed in public via hanging, but Thug Behram was executed in private. And then there was another source out there that was saying that it's possible that he cut a deal and he avoided execution and then he just kind of disappeared and started a new life, which wouldn't have been that long. Once again, he would have been 75 years old. But, I mean, I don't personally believe that he was hanged. Coming at this from a complete fresh take standpoint, like a fresh set of eyes on the case, looking at those details, if his cohorts are executed in public and they claim that he was executed in private, but nobody saw it, that gives me the impression that he wasn't really hanged, and they're just kind of staging the scene. He might have been in prison for 2 years just so he is kind of making it look more normal, and then they eventually let him out. I mean, if they're going to say that he was hanged privately, I don't believe that he would have actually been able to or he wouldn't have been executed if that's the case. So as you see, though, I'm very doubtful of many things in the narrative. First, the first one is that he started killing at age 10 and that he was hanged in private. I don't necessarily believe that happened. And also just the motivations about this, that they're actually trying to serve the goddess Kali. No, I believe they're doing it for greed. But the thing is, though, Thug Behram, like, one of the things that I didn't really recognize about him when I was first reading this stuff as a teenager is he committed the murders with a handkerchief. It's quite the odd thing to use because it was a modified handkerchief that had a medallion sewn into it. And the reason is, once again, no women, no children, they're targeting men. So the medallion is meant to go right along the man's Adam's apple so it'll be easier to strangle him. And there was a podcast out that was talking about this case called the Unsung Podcast, and they mentioned, this is the only place I heard this, but they mentioned that he sedated many of the victims before he murdered them. But the thing is, once he's apprehended, he confesses to around. I always forget this number. It's between 125 and 100 and 250 victims that he actually participated in the murder of. But one, we don't necessarily even know if that's true or that's how many. But the thing is, he is reported to have possibly murdered as many as 931, totally an alleged number. And is it likely that he did commit that many murders? I don't know if I don't know. I mean, I don't think we'll have any idea at all what the exact number of victims that he murdered was, or that he helped other people participate in. They definitely would probably attribute all of the murders of the Thuggee cult at the time to Thug Behram, if they could. I mean, because people like to hype things up and they like to overly exaggerate. But I mean, it's just you see though that the narrative coming, from India in the 1700s and the 1800s has probably been very fractured. And not to mention that these guys are hiding, they're disguising themselves. They became rather well known, and people knew that the thugs were going out and trying to murder people. So the thugs had to kind of blend in with society and disguise themselves and pretend to be different people and act like they were friendly with everybody. So once again, they're being deceptive. They're being kind of like they're doing using this masquerade sort of fashion. I don't know if we'll ever get the exact numbers. Is it likely though that he murdered 931 people? Probably not. But it's just a fascinating story all the same. Absolutely terrible. I mean, he's committing murders. I mean, there's still murders no matter who he's killing, and it is something that is very morally wrong, but it's still quite fascinating because I don't really find that a lot of serial killers function in this way. There probably was a cycle of abuse in his life, a probably very traumatic childhood, coming out of extreme poverty. And this is one of the motivations that they mentioned for the Thuggee cult, is just that there was an enormous amount of poverty around them, and this is one of the ways that people escaped poverty. And we've talked about that with varieties of real world present day examples. I don't think that we've changed too much like that. Like people getting recruited into terrorist cells, people getting recruited into also even political cults in the 21st century because they're just trying to escape something. And that's not only that they're trying to escape poverty, but it's when it comes to cult leadership in the 21st century, they're also trying to escape loneliness and despair, and they feel they are not loved and such. And I'm sure there would have been those examples in the Thuggee cult as well. But I mean, Thug Behram was allegedly executed at age 75. He definitely would have had the opportunity to commit 931 murders. It's possible. I don't see. I mean, we definitely have the number of years that he was involved with crime is definitely possible. And especially at the age of 75, I began to think that it was somewhat more plausible that he would have committed an enormous amount of murders. But it's like it's just one of those things that's going to be lost to history about all the details of what really happened. And people really like to overly glorify and overly hype things up. And of course, they're going to be saying that, oh, he murdered a bazillion people if they thought it was a better story and such. As soon as people can start getting fluffy with the details, they're going to get fluffy with the details. This is one of the cases, though, that I thought there would be more stuff on YouTube about. I mean, there's an enormous amount of things in the Indian languages, but I mean, I'm from West Virginia, not from India. I don't speak Tamil or Hindi or Telugu, so I can't really evaluate that stuff too much. But I really thought there'd be more Western perspectives on the case because very famous, absolutely. I mean, you look at any sort of serial killer website or something like the most prolific serial killers, he's always near the top. I mean, he's often has an asterisk next to his name because they are alleged murders that took place. No one can confirm that he murdered 931 people, but I really thought there would be more discussions. So you see, though, if we're going to talk about everything that's happened, you have someone who is trying to escape poverty, who is kind of somewhat dominant as a leader, enforcing his own tenets. But you also have a kind of a historical record that is filled with frilly and fluffy details that probably didn't exactly happen exactly the way that is presented. I believe that there was a guy in India that murdered an enormous amount of people, probably just as they say, with the handkerchief that has the medallion sewn into it, and that one is actually in a private museum currently. So all of that stuff is true. All of that stuff actually happened. But the thing is, we just don't really know how big the Thuggee cult was, how many people were actually murdered. And I really should say, though, I was only one source that I heard, Kalinka TV, that was talking about how he was executed in private and his cohorts were executed in public. Only one source was mentioning that. It just kind of depends on who you want to believe at that point. Once again, 1840 in India, a lot's probably going to be lost right there, and we're dealing with someone who isn't exactly, the king of